Thank you for joining us. Welcome to our monthly webinar series. I am Anna Popovich, Program Director at Humanist Canada. I will be moderating today's conversation, which will be 60 minutes in length with time allotted for Q&A. And please, if you have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to submit them with either the Q&A tool at the bottom of the screen, or you can also raise your hand and ask the question directly. And we'll be taking questions throughout the presentation as well as at the end. Today, we will be talking about strategies for building safe and resilient communities. And we are joined by Teale Bondaroff, a researcher and community organizer with a PhD in politics and international studies from the University of Cambridge, and BAs in political science and international relations from the University of Calgary. Teale is also the research coordinator for the British Columbia Humanist Association, the director of research for OceansAsia, a marine conservation organization based out of Hong Kong, the chair and co-founder of the AccessBC Campaign for free prescription contraception, and the volunteer member of the board of the Greater Victoria Placemaking Network. His academic research examines the strategic use of international law by non-state actors. Again, a pleasure to have you with us, Teale. Thanks so much for your time. Thanks for having me. Over to you. Yeah.
Thanks so much for having me. And hello, friends. I'm so glad you could all make it out today. So I'm joining you on from the traditional territories of the Lekwungen peoples, and those are folks that are represented by the Esquimalt, Songhees, and Wasanic people here in Saanich in Victoria in British Columbia. And we're going to do, I'm going to see if I can share my screen here. Actually, we forgot to check that out before we started here. Let me get my our slides going here. Excellent. Everyone hopefully can see that all right. Here we're going to get a thumbs up in the...
Yeah, we can see that.
Excellent. Brilliant. So yes, we are talking placemaking. We're talking building community today. And as you already heard, I do lots of different things. So if you are feeling distracted during the talk, head over to accessbc.org, where you can write one of our British Columbia MLAs about free contraception. This is a really important issue that's been going on. We've been campaigning on this for 5 years, but it's really been thrown into the public spotlight over the past few months with what's going on in America. I do work in marine conservation, I do independent academic research, and I work at the BC Humanists. But today, I am talking to you about my work with the Greater Victoria Placemaking Network. I've been involved since about 2017, and I'm the lead of the Pocket Places project. I'm going to tell you a bit about that, but before I do, let's take a step back and talk about what is placemaking. I also realize that I can't see the Q&A, so if there is a question, please do flag it for me as we go. Maybe I should just turn those on there. Maybe I can. Yes, there we go. Brilliant. Okay, I can see the chat, see what's going on from folks. And do please ask questions as we go. I've done this talk several times, so if the answer is coming up, I will let you know. But I want to talk about what you're interested in. So ask lots of questions. Let's talk placemaking and community building. So what is placemaking? So placemaking is the process of community members working together to improve shared public spaces. That's sort of a technical definition, but the way I like to describe it is softening the hard edges of the city, creating public spaces where people want to be, where people can gather, creating places where individuals can mix and meet with strangers. One of the things that we often note when we're reflecting on the way we've designed our cities is there aren't a lot of opportunities for us to meet people who are very different than ourselves, who we may never bump into in ordinary lives. I'm the kind of person who will have a conversation with someone in line for the grocery store, but otherwise I don't bump into strangers very often, maybe on public transit. But when you have public spaces where people want to hang out, where they want to gather, they will necessarily mix with people, different people. So here's an example of a parklet from down here, downtown in Victoria, where you've taken a couple of parking spots that would otherwise be reserved for boring old cars taking up public space and polluting. And it's been replaced with a vibrant public space where people can meet and eat their lunches and fall into conversations with strangers. Oh, hold on here. There we go. So one of the things about placemaking is it is collaborative. where it's bottom up. It's not cities impose, well, it can be, but it's not necessarily cities building public spaces. It's members of the public transforming their communities. And this active engagement is really important as well, as it helps people have an active role in shaping the world around them. Very often when we think of large infrastructure projects like bridges and roads and even bike lanes, we don't really have a say in those or an active role in making them happen. They're too big. But placemaking can be very small, very intimate, and it's a way for us to stamp our own identities on the urban landscape and to bring other people in. So the Greater Victoria Placemaking Network is a group of folks that work on placemaking here in Victoria, and we have all sorts of different projects. I'm going to share a few of those with you here. But before we do, I think it's critical to understand why placemaking is really important these days. So we look at before the pandemic, there was a study done by the Vancouver Foundation from a few years ago, and they found that in Vancouver, 1/4 of residents felt isolated and 1/7 of residents described themselves as being lonely. Now, those numbers have only gotten worse since the pandemic because there are fewer opportunities to casually bump into members in public. Such is the extent of loneliness that in England, under Theresa May's government, say what you will about her, she actually had a minister of loneliness dealing with this problem of social isolation and loneliness. And research and empirical evidence suggests that being lonely is, as far as your health is concerned, the equivalent of smoking a pack a day or being obese. This has severe impacts on people's health, their well-being, their mental health. And so it's critical that we actually create these public spaces that help foster civic life and help create community. Community ultimately starts with connections between individuals. So fostering connections between people that then extend to a broader scope. So that's what community is all about. And we need spaces for community to flourish. So one of those things that you can do, you can create spaces. So the Placemaking Network has been working on a wide range of projects. We have spontaneous public art, gatherings. This is a safety bench on the top corner here. It's one of my favorite. It's a public bench. It's got a community board, a solar powered phone charger, but inside that case there, you can see, what you can't see is a silver case that's locked up, but all the neighbors have a key to it, or the combination rather. And if there's an emergency, it's got flashlights, blankets, water tablets, spare medication for some of the neighbors, and their emergency plan. So this bench is not only a beautiful garden, gathering place, resting place, spot to charge your phone, place to get information about the community, but it's also a space where you can be safe during an emergency. And we are in an earthquake zone out here. So placemaking can be temporary. You can have temporary bike lanes, testing out a concept just to see if it works, or perhaps setting up benches and chairs at a festival, or a temporary summer palette project, or it can be permanent. This is one example from Montreal, where you have an alleyway that was a really good site to shoot like a 1990s cop drama or episode of Highlander. And then in the bottom, it's been transformed into a vibrant public space with planters and meeting places and chairs and tables for people to gather. You're not likely to hang out in the first road in 2013, but in the second road, you're more likely to go and gather and meet people, and because it's Montreal, probably have a glass of wine. So this is how placemaking can transform public spaces. And these larger scale projects do have a definitive, like a huge impact. So right here, we have an average corner. This is in Seattle. You're not going to stand out there and hang out. But in the space beneath it, you've got sitting areas and trees and stairs and ramps and all sorts of manner of infrastructure that makes it more likely for people to gather and to hang out. So placemaking can be fun and whimsical too. This is one of the things that really draws me to it. I often say we don't have enough whimsy in our lives. This is an example of that. This is yarn bombing. So someone has knit a lovely tree cozy for this tree. It's bright, it's vibrant, it makes you smile. And sometimes that's enough, right? Sometimes we don't need to necessarily have a gathering space or transform an alleyway through lots of work. Sometimes it's knitting a cozy scarf for a tree. This is an example of a parklet in downtown Victoria. So basically setting up a little sitting space where otherwise there would be cars parked. We've got pole painting out here in Victoria is very popular. A boring old pole covered in staples is now transformed by local art. And they update these every year. And you can say, oh, I'm the third house down from the post with the Totoro on it, or turn right at the cat post. It makes life more interesting. It makes the public space more vibrant. These are some temporary benches that we install with the Placemaking Network at events. They fold up. They're kind of like giant origami chairs. And they're just a way of creating spaces for people to hang out and rest during events. But placemaking doesn't even have to be that large. These are little fairy gardens that people set up here in Victoria. And sometimes it's just plonking down a little bit of art in your front lawn to make life more interesting. one of my favorites is a soup garden. So they can also be functional, right? So here's someone who set up a garden with different herbs and spices. So if you were particularly interested in some rosemary and sage, you could grab some from the soup garden. I mean, this is just literally on the side of a community center in Fernwood here in Victoria. And this one I thought would appeal to folks today. And something I've been wanting to do, but I don't have my own pictures, is giant board games. So board games are necessarily social, but we often do them in small spaces at home. But why not bring that into the public space? I can only imagine the kind of heckling that would go on from a giant Settlers of Catan game. Well, meanwhile, you're trying to trade a couple of sheep for some ore, and the public is yelling at you, and the giant dice are rolling over your feet. It creates a public and dynamic space, which is absolutely delightful. And this is another one which I've been wanting to write a paper on for a while, moss graffiti, right? So you can basically grow moss in an artistic form to do artistic expression. And I particularly like this example because, you can just obviously wash it off, but in the meantime, it's growing living art. And here is a young person watering their moss wall. And one of the great things about placemaking elements is you can combine them all. So this is a gazebo that was set up at the Niagara Grocery down here in Victoria and James Bay. And they've got sitting areas, they've got homemade recyclable bunting, you've got a bulletin board with information about community events, there's a little free library, which we're about to talk about. And they've even added a bunch of coffee tables, and I think there's music playing during the day. So this is a vibrant public space where people can gather and hang out and just be and interact with other people. So the two types of placemaking I want to talk about today, and these are really accessible forms of placemaking, because sometimes we all don't have the ability to, say, rebuild an entire street corner, are little free libraries and road murals. So we're going to jump into those, and those are two projects I've been intimately involved in here in Victoria. The first is the Pocket Places project. So this is a project that I've been running since about 2017, and it's all about little free libraries. Little free libraries are those book boxes you find on the side of the road or public places or in people's homes that operate on the principle of the give a book, take a book. And the Pocket Places project has 3 or 4 main goals. We promote, map, stock, and build little free libraries. I'm really excited to say that in Victoria, the project has kind of it's become rather bonkers. So just so you can tell, these are my notes when I give this talk, and I've had 3 layers of sticky notes on my sheet because little free libraries are being built so quickly. So just for context, when we started the project in 2017, there were 111 little free libraries, and our goal was to try to build 150 for Canada's 150th birthday. Well, we met that goal, and since that time, people have been building them faster and faster. It's been absolutely mind-boggling. We have 607 in the Capital Regional District, that's the Greater Victoria area. We cut the ribbon on number 600 in March of this year. It was built by a high school student at Oak Bay High as her final year project. But just for context, number 500, we cut the ribbon on in July of last year. And we had 550 in October 2021. So people love building little libraries. And the pandemic, if anything, has had people build them quicker because they recognize the need for points of community. I've often described little free libraries as coral reefs for community. They create a space for people to meet and interact, but they do it differently. So I don't know about everyone who's listening in today, but you probably don't fall into a conversation about personal matters or your preferences with random strangers in the street or sitting on the bus. But at a little free library, you actually will fall into conversations with people about what they're reading. You have a ready-made subject matter for conversation. Hey, did you find any good books? What kind of things do you like to read? And suddenly you're having a conversation with someone, but a rather intimate subject. My favorite recent story was I was down in Fernwood. I meet this guy and he's like, well, I'm a little embarrassed about my book preferences. I'm like, oh man, what do you like to read? He's like, well, I like to read aviation fiction. And I was like, oh my gosh, have you read Antoine de Saint-Exupéry's Night Flight? And suddenly we were talking about aviation fiction. Of course, all the books I could think of, he's already read, and we had something to talk about. And I had a new friend and a person I could connect with on a level beyond simply commenting about the weather. So little free libraries are great in that way. They also help share books with people, which helps promote literacy. But as we're going to see, there's so much more than just books. I've met lots of friends through these. I've also brought our little free library alive on social media, and I have friends around the world. And you'll actually have 2 little free libraries tweeting at each other. And it's quite delightful because you have to realize that there are 2 humans on either end, but the little libraries are saying things like, well, how are your books today? Oh, your books are doing pretty good. Or there was a little library in Texas that their neighborhood got flooded out. So we got to message them and say, hey, how are you doing? Oh, I'm doing well. I'm currently inside a plastic bag. So there are these levels of whimsy that you can add, not just to the urban landscape, but you can translate that and create an interface between the real and the digital. And that's also really great too, because sometimes people don't want to go down to the library every day, but getting out and checking on the library gives them an excuse to leave their home. My favorite story for that is a neighbor of mine tweeted at our library and said, hey, I'm bringing down some manga. And I love manga. So I ran down there and grabbed a bunch of new comic books, met a new friend. And now she has a little library on her front lawn. I was at her New Year's party before the pandemic, and I was borrowing, or rather eating, the magnolia flowers from her tree a few weeks ago. So it's a great way to just create connection between people. So these are just some examples of little free libraries, and they come in so much shapes and sizes, which is something that also fills me with joy. Some of them will be purpose-built, some of them will be upcycled from different materials. People have added lighting, so this one has its own solar-powered light, so at night it lights up. And it's one of those aspects where people's creativity really shines through, pun intended, of course. You have little libraries that are shaped like homes. You've got ones indoors in community centers, or people's laundry rooms in their buildings. And you can start to see them combined with other placemaking elements. So this is one in the community center where there's benches and bike racks, magazine racks, places to sit. And you're starting to create layers of placemaking that make the space just more appealing and more interesting. This is one of my favorite shots. This is a little free library at the top of Roseberry Hill. It's a really steep hill. So when I'm out with a bike trailer topping up libraries, I don't visit this one very much because it's a lot of hill. But when you get up there, it's got its own flag. It's got its own lights at night. It's got its own guest book just down here in the little purple box. And it's always an absolute delight to meet. Look, it's even got its own little mosaic pathway. So this is one thing I love about little libraries, and I visit a lot of them. So the Pocket Places project, in addition to promoting little libraries, also helps stock them. I go out with a bike trailer a couple times a week if I can, if it's not pouring rain, and I will drop off maybe 300 or 400 books to little libraries around the neighborhoods. And as a result, I get to see all the different projects. We've done 67,000 books since 2017, and we started partnerships with local bookstores. So my favorite one is with a local bookstore called Russell Books, and they get a lot of books that they can't sell because they're a little bit old, they're tatty, or not popular, but they also don't want to throw them away because A, they love books. Who wants to throw away books? But also B, they had to pay to throw them away. And so we've created this beautiful mutual relationship where they give us all the books they can't sell. I give them to little free library people who love them and just eat them up. And that way the books get another lease on life and are back out there in the world. The bookstore benefits because they get someone taking all these books, and everybody wins because there's more books in the world. And we've given out more than 10,000 books with that part of the project. My favorite one was they were moving bookstores and I was like, look, you don't need to pay to dispose of and/or move these books. Just call my little library people. They'll come and empty you out. And so for an entire afternoon, we were pulling boxes of books out of this old bookshop and sending them off into the world, where otherwise the bookstore would have had to have carted them off. Now I see someone, is that potentially a question there? No. Excellent.
A question.
Oh, you have a question? Yes, please. I can't see. Oh, there's the Q&A. Okay, hold on here. I'm starting to figure, there we go. Excellent question here. So the question is, placemaking is based on volunteer spirit and a noted lack of significant structure. Lots of the examples are relatively small and therefore inexpensive. Some examples show some revisions to a couple of parking spots that probably cost quite a bit to build. Are there any funding opportunities for placemaking running? Fantastic question. This is a good time to ask it. So it really depends on where you are. And cities and municipalities and districts can take an active role in helping sponsor and support placemaking. So here in Victoria, we have the CRD. We have almost more than a dozen municipalities in a small area. And so you get to see a diversity of municipal management structures. Victoria does a fantastic job. Not only do they have really accessible public grants, they also have a guidebook to how to do placemaking to give people ideas, because a lot of times people just haven't thought of something yet. And I think one of the reasons why our project has taken off so quickly, or in the last few years, is because once people hear about little free libraries, they fall in love with them and they want one too. And every time someone submits one to our map, which I'll show you in a few minutes, they will. I often ask them well, why did you want to build a little free library? And a lot of them are things like, well, my partner's always wanted one after she saw one on such and such a street, and I finally got around to building her one. Or our kids always wanted one because they love visiting the ones around the corner, and we finally set one up. But there's a lot of things municipalities can do to foster these things. The first one is grants. So you're right, some things cost a bit of money. Our little library project, we basically operate on zero budget, but at one point we had money from the municipality to buy a bike trailer and to store books so that between sort of droughts, we'd have a supply of books. And those grants weren't a lot. Like our first initial grant from the city of Victoria was $5,000. And we basically used that for more than 2 years. And we ran 2 seminars, we did outreach, we helped set up about 30 little free libraries. And that was through something called the Migrate Neighborhood grants. And the thing I love about them in Victoria is not only do they have very accessible grants, they will give them to an average person rather than say an organization with insurance and things like that. But they have tiny grants. So they have grants that are only $50. And as a result, the barriers are not very high. And so anyone can do one. So you apply for a grant, it's 2 pages. All you need to do afterwards is send a photo of what you did. And bing, bang, boom, you've got support from the municipality to do something. Now, $50 is not a lot of money, but it is, for some reason, it validates the action. So if I call my neighbors out and say, hey, neighbors, we would like to run a gathering to figure out how we can transform our street. We're going to get some pizza, we're going to get some tea, maybe some cookies, and we've got a grant from the city for this meeting. Suddenly that makes it more valid than like, hey, random people, come over to my house. Let's talk about making the street better. So that can help. And then the larger grants do help get rid of some of the barriers. So things like materials can be expensive. I'll show you some of the projects in a second, particularly projects with things that need to be used like paint. But you can also get them for free. So for example, here you can go to the local dump and find paint. And you could conceivably, and all those pole painting pictures I showed you, those are all done from reused and recycled paint from the dump. But you can also buy nice paint with colors that like you couldn't necessarily find in the dump. So there's lots of ways of sort of making things both cost efficient, but also the ways that municipalities can support things. And then some of them are also just removing barriers. So the philosophy that I have, or I'd like to encourage municipalities to have, is a yes and approach when it comes to these kinds of projects. So the contrast I'd give you here is City of Saanich and City of Victoria. So City of Victoria has when it comes to road murals, which we'll talk about in a little bit, has a 8-page or 6-page guidelines with advice and tips on how to do a road mural, links to information on how to apply for grants, lessons learned, best practices, Q&As. If you want to do a road mural, they want to help you do it. And they actually have staff members who will sit down with you and help you write the grants. Whereas in Saanich, my municipality, it's taken me 3.5 years of slowly negotiating with engineering and trying to find grants and applying multiple ways and places and sources and conversations, and 5 projects have fallen through to finally get a road mural project close to being started. We're hopefully going to be putting brush to pavement in August. We just need to get the finalized designs approved. That's a lot of work. Most people don't have 3.5 years of patience or impatience trying to push projects through the bureaucracy, a bit of bureaucratic swashbuckling. So what you really need is municipalities who are willing to say, that's a beautiful project, let's make it happen, let's help you make it happen, rather than here's a bunch of barriers to make your life more difficult. One last example before I move on here is my little free library in the park, Rutledge Park LFL on Twitter. It has maybe like 2,000 followers on Twitter. And for its first birthday, I wanted to throw a party and replace the plexiglass that got cracked and basically have a little birthday party for our library. So I applied to our city for a $300 grant for like party supplies and some food and some brochures and some plexiglass. And the response I got was, well, we don't think it's going to have enough visibility or impact. And I'm thinking, like, my little library had more Twitter followers than the bloody mayor. We have 2,000 people that live in our area. And what else can I do? And it was very frustrating and experience for someone who writes grants for a living. I thought, if I can't get $300 from my municipality to throw a party for a little free library to make our community a little bit better, then we need to work on making that better. That's a problem. So it really depends on where you are, but the thing I'd recommend doing for those of you who want to do one of these projects is reach out to your city first. You'll notice that the little libraries here, a lot of them are on private property, but this one here, which is mine, where is it? There, that's the Rutledge Park one on the right with the kids there. That one's in the middle of a park, and it took us about 6 months of talking to parks to make sure that it was properly installed. They wanted to improve the designs. And you can see that metal stand there is a properly welded metal stand that the parks actually built for us and installed on the concrete. It took some extra time, but our little library is incredibly popular in the park. We went through 5,000 books in the first year, and I stopped counting now because it's just gotten out of hand. But it's incredibly popular because it's in the middle of a park rather than being hidden away on someone's front lawn. But there's nothing wrong with hiding them away on someone's front lawn, by the way. They're also really fantastic. And these other examples are that. But you can see some of the diversity of little free libraries. So some of them are super simple. There's an old A-frame. Some of them are incredibly elaborate with like angel wings or shaped like the company that, or the organization that installed them. And I love the diversity because it allows people to really express their creativity and to explore form on a very simple, in a very simple way. And this is an example of me going out with the bike trailer, topping up little libraries. And this is just some examples of how much little free libraries have expanded in our region. So this is the map from last time I gave this presentation about 6 months ago. There's 607 little free libraries in our region now. This is the map that we built. This is the map from about, as I said, about a few months ago, but I've recently updated it and now it looks like this. We've added more layers. And the layers reflect the changing nature of the libraries. So on this map, you're going to see different colors. The blue are little free libraries that give out books. The purple are little free libraries that give out books, but I don't have a photo. The pink are little free puzzle and game libraries. So people share board games and puzzles. And the green are little free plant libraries. And the yellow is a reminder to go look and try and find the library that is rumored to be in that location. And I do that a lot, by the way. So I'm out there with the bike trailer, topping up libraries a couple times a week. But I don't just drop off books. And this is the other aspect with placemaking. They are useful. Little free libraries are critical and it's so helpful for distributing other important information. So here's me at one of our book giveaways. So we get books, we give them away to people and they give them, put them in their little free libraries. But during the pandemic, we started giving out other things. So this is a chalk your block project where we noticed that in the middle of 2020, people were stuck at home, kids were getting bored and antsy. We wanted a way of doing placemaking that wasn't necessarily bringing people together in person because that was something we were trying to avoid doing with the pandemic. And so what we did was we created the Chalk Your Block project, where I gave out hundreds of big chunks of sidewalk chalk with information and a social media campaign. And the idea was to encourage people to go and do beautiful chalk pictures and share them with us and share them with their neighbors. And we use little free libraries as a way of distributing those. I've given out bookmarks for the Literacy Connection, which is just another way of getting information to people who are interested in literacy, and people who visit little libraries, surprise, surprise, are interested in literacy. A local builder fell in love with this book. And if you were interested in placemaking, please read Charles's book. It's called Happy City, and it's all about how we design cities to make people happier, to encourage happiness. And so this local builder fell in love with this book, and he calls us up and he's like, I want to give out some copies of this book to little libraries. And we're like, great. It's like, I want to do one for every library in town. And we're like, dude, there's 350 of them. He's like, great. So he bought us 350 copies of Happy City. We met the author who, if you buy 350 copies of someone's book, they're going to come over from Vancouver to sign it for you. And I've been giving those out to little libraries. I gave them out for a few months and I still see them popping up in little libraries to this day. And this is a great book. And it was great because someone was inspired to share things through these little book boxes. Here's another example during the pandemic. This lovely person has made handmade masks and has them available at their little library. And at the moment, you can see little libraries also have deeper messages. This is one around the corner from us that they update the painting on the side to reflect really important political issues, including Black Lives Matter. And so it's always nice to visit this library because it always has a message about something that's going on in the world that's important. And we've started to take an active role in using little libraries to share information about truth and reconciliation. So last year, we raised enough money to buy almost 1,000 of these little books. This is the Truth and Reconciliation Calls to Action. And we dropped them off to little libraries throughout the city. I think we had 900 and something odd little booklets. And I still find them in little libraries today. And the idea is that people take them, they read them. These are really important points to learn about reconciliation, and then they pass them on to friends. The second phase of this project has been doing books for children about truth and reconciliation and healing. And we did our first round a few months ago where we got to buy copies of a book from a local author and share those at little libraries, only because the Truth and Reconciliation Calls to Action is a bit dense for the under 12s. And I'm currently dropping off copies of, there we go, the moose hide campaign, these little moose hide pieces that are all about tackling violence against women and children. And I've already dropped off about 2,000 of those to the libraries around town. And we've done all sorts of other things, community information. During Pride Month, I was dropping off zines. We've done, I was also dropping off information for performance from a friend of mine, bookmarks from a local publisher. So the little library becomes a place to share more than just books. And what we've been seeing increasingly are people are iterating on the idea of a little free library. So it starts off as just sharing books, But then we have ones that are dedicated to just poetry. This is the poetry. We actually have 2 poetries in Victoria, 2 people rocking a good pun. And this one just shares poetry. But you also have little libraries dedicated to children's books. This one, these are 2 libraries. One does just children's books, one does puzzles and board games. And I don't know if anyone else is out there that does puzzles, but like after you've done the same puzzle of flowers 3 times, you want to try something new. And so the puzzle swap is a great way to swap and find a new puzzle. And the really fun thing with this is I opened this up one time and taped to the door is a little baggie with a single piece of a puzzle and a note that said, to the person who got the, the cat puzzle last week, this is the missing piece. I found it in my rug. So, this is sort of interesting discourse back and forth between folks. We have plant and seed libraries that are really critical for food security and helping people access plants. Those have been setting up in town. We actually have 14 of those. Those are those green dots on the map. And then people do all sorts of wild things. Like this is a little free art gallery. So you can't open this, but it's got a little vernissage. You've got homemade art on tiny easels. There's a succulent garden on the top. And they update this art every few months with a new little art show. So you can go down this street and just have a little experience. There's also at the bottom of the hill from that one is a little free art supplies stand. So this box shares both art and art supplies. And last time I was there, it was just brimming with paint and pencils and paper clips and all sorts of different materials, which can be really important because people who want to explore art and creativity, sometimes cost is a barrier. And so this little art box helps reduce that barrier. And one that we don't have in Victoria that I really want to have is a little free menstrual product box. This is one from Vancouver. And this is something if people are looking for a project that's going to have a really important impact in fighting period poverty. This is a really good one. And it does involve a bit more of support simply because books tend to be borrowed, but obviously menstrual products is kind of a one-way stream. So you're going to want to create a partnership with someone to help you supply the materials. But you also have little free pantries that share food items, which can be it's a conversation to be had about whether those are adequate, or whether they actually kind of present problems around access to food and people should be using food banks. But you have little free libraries for household goods. And so the sheer amount of diversity that you see with these little book boxes is beautiful. And it often serves a community need or just adds whimsy to the urban landscape, which in a sense is a community need. And one thing I should say is during the pandemic, we had people with little help books in little libraries that would say like, can help or need help. And you could fill in paper and leave your email and say like, hey, I need someone to help me pick up groceries once a week. Or, hey, I have a car, I can take people to medical appointments or pick up groceries. And so you had this sort of like a community public information board through the little library. So the Pocket Places project that I run, we've run workshops on how to build little libraries, and we've helped build them. So one of the things that brings me the most joy is taking old things like newspaper boxes and upcycling them into little free libraries. So our local newspaper gave us a bunch of these, and actually 3 different newspapers have given us newspaper boxes. And these are great because you get the situation where people who like little libraries, people who want them, and people who know how to build stuff, often there's a very sort of thin overlap in the Venn diagram. And so these are great because you can just paint them and put them on your front lawn. They're good to go and they last forever because they're built to take like a car. So the upcycling of little free libraries from newspaper boxes is great. And you can see the diversity here, right? So the one there little in the middle there is the one my friend Amy made. The one on the right side there, they've added a roof and a light. They were a bit more creative. I think they changed the door around a little bit. But there's just so much creativity. But the upcycling is great because these would have otherwise just become scrap metal. And now they're sharing books. And then once you have a little library, there are just a couple tips, because this is the fun part. Like if you're interested in more on how to like maintain and manage your little library, let me know. I've got some blog posts I could share with you, and they're available on our placemaking website. But once you have a library, it's not done, right? So you can start curating it and having events at your library that create community around them. So one of the things that we do are I'll theme our little library for different holidays. This is Pride Month. And so we put some flags up, and we were sharing LGBTQ plus fiction and nonfiction as much as we could find at the library. During Remembrance Day, we had poppies out, and we tried to put books about various wars that Canadian forces have fought in. And it's actually quite simple to run a little library. The tips I usually have are make sure it's, installed in a dry location. You don't have like someone's sprinkler spraying into it. It's accessible. People often put them up too high, but you want to remember that young people are going to be exploring them. So, and people with different mobility needs. So make sure that you don't have it too high up. And don't make them too big or too small. If they're too small, there's not enough books in them to keep people engaged. But if they're too big, they're always going to look empty. There's one little library in Fernwood that can hold like 300 books. It takes an entire bike trailer to fill. It always seems empty, even if there's already 200 books in it. And also making sure that your shelves are the right size. You'll notice here in this picture that you've got paperbacks and hardcovers. And we made sure that that top shelf was high enough to accommodate hardcovers. Some little libraries just do paperbacks, but we liked having the diversity in size. So making sure your shelves are the right size is just a good pro tip. And there's so many different holidays you can celebrate, right? So like, rather than like we did, these are two examples of, of Pride Month and Remembrance Day, but for Canada Day, we put up a flag and do Canadian literature. Black History Month, we were trying to focus on Black writers. You can celebrate your favorite author's birthday. One of my favorite stories was I found a bunch of books from one of my favorite authors, just put them in the library and tweeted at her like, today it's Jacqueline Carey Day at the library. And that made her smile, and it just made a little bit of extra whimsy and engaged with folks a bit more. And the final tip I'll say, the two tips I'll say is it's often a good advice to not have your library totally full. Usually filling it at about 2/3 reminds neighbors to bring books along when they go out for a walk. If it's totally jam-packed every time, they're not going to bring books along. And you'll find the first few months of having a library, they tend to have more books going than coming, but they tend to reach an equilibrium after some time. And neighbors start coming out of the woodworks and bringing books and putting books aside to bring out when they go walk their dogs and things like that. So they tend to take on a life of their own. And sometimes they will get damaged. You'll notice here the window's been cracked. Our door of our library was torn off in the winds 2 nights ago. So repairing them quickly is important because otherwise they look a bit worn down. And also tidying the books on a regular basis can help because it reminds people that someone's checking on it. And in fact, in that way, and this is why I have safe communities as well, and we'll get to the second safety aspect in a minute, but little libraries create a presence in a space, and placemaking does in general. It reminds people that there are humans around that love that space, and they tend to then treat the space with more respect. And so in that way, little libraries can actually reduce antisocial behavior. And you don't often see them getting tagged or damaged because people respect them as an item on the urban landscape. Things still do happen. So if they do happen, repair them quickly, don't take it too personally, and try to move on. My philosophy is whenever the doors get damaged, I build 10 new little libraries in the world somewhere. And the final thing is that you can bring them alive on social media, as I mentioned. And that's a great way of just connecting people with your placemaking elements, but doing so in a way that is engaging on different platforms. And it helps. Oh, I've gotten fuzzy here. Hold on here. I'm going to stop sharing here. I've suddenly become very fuzzy in my camera. One sec. Too much gesticulating. There we go. It's a good time to pause anyhow, because I'm going to move on to the next item of road murals. So bring your little libraries alive on social media. Let's talk road murals. So the second thing I'm very passionate about is road murals. And I think part of this might be the way I was raised. I was raised by artists, hence the name Teale. This is actually my wall. It's not a background. My dad put this mural in when he visited a few years back. So murals are kind of, I guess, in my blood. But murals are a fantastic way of, they actually accomplish a lot of things. Now, today we're going to talk about road murals. Now, road murals are murals that are built on the surface of a road, rather than on a wall or a post or something like that. And these serve a very important function of increasing road safety, creating a sense of community, beautifying your community, and also when they're engaging with young people or local issues, they can also be educational. So I want to explore those elements of road murals because I'm fascinated by the way that simply putting paint on pavement can help make our communities safer. So road murals are bright colors on the surface of the road. And people often, the first thing people say is, and our provincial road insurance, our car insurance company said when I talked to them, was, won't that distract drivers? And the answer is yes. The bright colors attract the attention of drivers, but that's in fact where you want the driver's attention. So when people are driving, they're often hopefully not on their phone, but they're often looking out to the far horizon. But when you're traveling through a space with young people, you want their attention to be focused close to the front of their car. And so road murals are a bright interjection into the urban landscape that cause people to focus on where they're going, and it gives them more attention to the road, which reduces the chances of accident. There's actually some really good empirical evidence to support this. But the bright colors remind drivers that there's young people around, there's humans around, and we already see this being used. So if you see like bike lanes on your streets, those are often painted green or different colors, and that's done to indicate that this road is being used differently. So when there's a mural on the surface of the road, it says this road is part of a community. It's being used by people and not just by vehicles. And what's interesting is there's been a lot of studies done on road mural adjacent things. So in the UK, they have what they called peripheral hatched markings. And you put these on the side of the highway. So in situations where you have like long highways, not a lot of things on the side of the road, you want to create visual movement in the peripheral vision of people to remind them how fast they're going. If anyone here is from Saskatchewan or driven through Saskatchewan or Alberta, you get going on those straight, long roads and you start getting your highway eyes, right? Where you're staring off in the distance and you look down and suddenly you get your speedometer and suddenly you're going 180. By the way, please don't drive that fast. But sometimes you get tricked into doing that because of the way the road's designed. What horizontal hash marks do, just like road trees, is they create movement on the peripheral sides of your eyes that actually give you a sense of how fast you're going. So in that way, road murals and hashed marks remind people how fast they're going, and ideally, they then slow down. There's been 2 studies that came out recently since I've started working on road murals that validate this. So there was a study in Kitchener, Ontario from last year, and they found that when you installed a road mural, the immediate effect was to reduce the 85th percentile speed by 5 kilometers an hour. Now, that may not seem like a lot, but bearing in mind that 5 kilometers an hour can be the difference between life and death or serious injury and no injury in the event of a crash or collision with a pedestrian or cyclist. Speed matters and speed kills. And so having people drive slower is really important to creating safer streets. And so reducing speeds by just 5 kilometers is really important and can actually save lives. And there was another study that was done in the United States. This came out, this is from Sam Schwartz Consulting in Bloomberg. This came out very recently. And they looked at 17 sites in America that were both road murals on the surface of the road, sidewalk paint, and underpasses. And they found that there was a 50% drop in crashes involving pedestrians and cyclists at those sites, a 37% drop in crashes leading to injuries. And they looked at 5 cities in more detail with cameras and watched how people interacted in those spaces. When they did that, they found that there was a 27% increase in the rate of drivers yielding to pedestrians when they were supposed to. I don't know how many of you stood on the side of the road and had people whiz past, but they were actually stopping. And there was a 25% drop in potentially dangerous conflicts. So those are just some of the empirical evidence that supports why road murals are an effective way of increasing road safety. They're also super cheap, right? So some of these interjections onto roads to make them safer, like chicanes or drop bollards or traffic circles or even speed bumps, can be expensive. You know, the cost of installing a controlled crosswalk or a chicane rather that makes kind of the road a bit ziggy-zaggy can be $15,000 to $50,000. Curb extensions or snack downs can cost like $50,000 to $100,000 depending on where you're putting them in. And speed bumps can be a bit cheaper. They can be $1,000 to $5,000, but also people are annoyed by speed bumps because they make noise and sometimes they interfere with emergency vehicles. So ultimately, what I like to say when it comes to road safety is pick a form of road safety that works for your neighborhood and your street. Road murals don't work in places with heavy traffic because they wear out because car tires and entropy. So they may not work everywhere, but they can work in some places. And one of those places are school zones, because it's really important that we remind people who are traveling through school zones that there's kids around, slow the heck down. And so they're a great way to engage young people in road safety. And the thing I love about this is when you engage young people, you can also add an educational element. I was talking to a local school where they wanted to put a road mural in their front area where it's kind of a circle for parents to drop off kids. And the idea that we had was to do the entire life cycle of salmon. And each grade would paint a different stage in the life cycle of salmon, starting with fry, going to the point where the salmon turn into the forest and feed trees. And so that way, not only would the kids be beautifying and making their community safer, but they'd also be learning about the life cycle of salmon, which are so critical out here on the West Coast. And then it could serve as an educational tool where students could go out and walk around the circle and physically talk about the life cycle of salmon. And then finally, and this is sort of a no-brainer, but little like road murals make the street more beautiful, right? Gray asphalt is kind of boring and ugly. This is a hummingbird mandala my friend installed in Collinson in Victoria. That's much more nicer to look at than, say, boring gray old sidewalks. And they make the world more beautiful and bright. This is a school zone or playground zone rather in Vancouver, where every year they add a few feet to their road mural. And it just looks nice. But on top of that, it also creates identity of place. And by that, I mean, it creates the sense of like, what is our street about? So one of my favorite examples is there's a street that has the Catskill Street in Vic West here, that they have, the neighborhood shares a couple of chickens. They move these chickens around from neighbor to neighbor. It's a chicken share. And so they've painted little chicken footprints across their road as a road mural. And they're the chicken street. They have a mural on the side of their wall that's shaped like a chicken. It created the identity of place so that you can say, hey, I live on the chicken street. And that makes someone more connected to that space and more likely to enjoy living there. But it also connects the neighbors, and it reflects the connectivity of the neighbors. So the neighbors now have an excuse to get together to repaint the mural every year, which is an excuse to have a block party. So it's one of the ways in which community building can be fostered through placemaking. I should say that, yes, you do need to repaint your road murals. They are going to wear out. Usually they last about a year, depending on what the traffic's like. If you're using don't put them on really busy roads, they will wear out really quickly. And so it's just important to have a schedule to repaint them annually, save some paint, save some time. This is not necessarily advisable. This mural here that I'm showing you on the screen has 100% road coverage, and most folks will advise against that because it does increase potentially the chances of having a slip, like by a tiny amount. And I would argue that cars driving slower is safer than the tiny increased surface slipperiness. But the general advice is to not have full coverage like this one here on Collinson. It's got enough road to add extra traction and keeps folks safe. And the other two questions we often get a lot of are, will it distract drivers? And the answer is yes, it does, but in a good way. Again, remember, it focuses their attention on the road, reminds them there's young people around, it tells them to slow down. So it's a good kind of distraction. We don't want people staring off to the horizon with their foot on the accelerator. And finally, yes, they do wear out. And as you heard at the top of the presentation, I do a lot of work on marine conservation. So we are concerned about pollution. So make sure that they're being taken care of. You will get tiny bits of paint wearing off. That just happens. And it becomes sort of a cost-benefit analysis of the benefits of safety and community building with a little bit of increased microplastics, but no more so than, say, microplastics from tires driving over top of them. And we recommend that you use a high quality exterior latex paint and pick your paint properly. And there's lots of guides out there about how to correctly select the right paint for an outdoor road mural project. So finally, this is the last thing I'll say before we jump to questions, because I see some things popping up in the chat. And that is a project that we're currently working on right here in Victoria right now. It's Curbside Colors. And this adds another element to the project. This isn't on a road. It's on a sort of a corner that's been closed off. So you see the bollards there. So it's pedestrian space, which is going to mean the mural is going to last a lot longer. But it's also working with a local Indigenous artist. And the design was by Brianna Bear, and it was installed by Jesse Campbell. And so you can see we have beautiful Indigenous art, which helps connect with the local environment. There's some salmon. We've got local flowers. We've got some Gary Oaks. So these are all things connecting this mural to the local place, which creates identity of place. It doesn't say this is some old boring street. This is a street that is connected to the local environment, that neighbors can have some physical item, physical representation of what their street and what their community is about. So these are just a couple of examples of the way that placemaking can help build community. For all of these projects, you'll notice that people are involved in installing them. These aren't cities just going ahead and doing them. It's people actively transforming public spaces to make them more human. And the last thing I'll say is, as the best example, is go try to have a conversation with a friend on the side of a very busy, loud street. It will not be a very long conversation. You're more likely to fall into a longer conversation in a vibrant public space that's quiet and where you feel safe and protected, kind of like this corner right here. And those kinds of conversations are the kind of conversations that build relationships, and those relationships are ultimately the foundation of community. And community isn't the solution to all of our problems, but it's an element that has to be there for solving our broader problems. And we have a lot of things that need to be done in the world. There's lots of work to be done, and community underpins all of that. So one of the ways we can foster communities with placemaking, and I want to encourage everyone to go out there and explore your communities. And if you see a way of making them softer and bringing people together, go ahead and get placemaking.
Thank you, Teale. Wow, that was very interesting. I had no idea there was such a robust infrastructure of little things in BC. That's really cool. I haven't seen such a diversity of, things here in Toronto, but again, maybe I missed them. I do see a lot of little libraries, but it is quite impressive.
I should say that each community has its own thing, right? So Victoria has become the community of little free libraries. partly because, well, I think largely partly because of our project, but different communities will have their thing. There are over 100,000 Little Free Libraries documented around the world. There's an organization called littlefreelibrary.org, and they have a map. But I know there's more because there's about 30 little libraries on their map here in Victoria, and we have 607 on ours. So there's clearly a lot of people who aren't buying the plaque to get registered on that library, on that map, the website rather. But there's tons of other little things that we don't even notice are placemaking. People have hung little things off trees to have inspirational messages. There's someone who's hung a bunch of like mugs and fine china off of a tree and down in James Bay, and I didn't realize it was the tea tree for a little while. There's teapots and things. I see some questions though. I might just jump to those if that's
sure.
Yeah, brilliant. So the first question is, do you need permission from your municipality to paint on a road mural? Yes. So unlike like a little free library, which you can usually just put in your front lawn, you are going to want to get permission for your road mural. You can obviously just do like temporary chalk drawings for fun, but you'll have to talk to your municipality, and that can be an interesting experience. So I kind of mentioned at the beginning of my chat about engaging with municipalities. Some municipalities are great. They yes and you, they'll provide you with information on how to get permits to close off the road and permissions. And then some of them you have to, basically it's an uphill battle. So it really depends on the municipality, but it's a kind of conversation you should start having if you're interested in it right away. Like I said, it took me about 3.5 years of wrangling with my municipality to get to the point where we have draft guidelines and a pilot project that we're going to be putting in August. That took a long time, and just sort of reminding the engineering people that we still exist and are still interested, but also just finding neighbors who are committed to that. I have an amazing gentleman I work with on this project who he realized it's going to be a couple of years. We've been doing it now for 2 years, whereas a couple of the other projects, people got really excited, and I'm like, this might take a while, and then they kind of fizzled out. But yeah, talking to municipalities. And what's really interesting too is we're starting to see evidence that these work. And one of the things that we're trying to do with our project is do research on it in addition to installing a road mural. So what I want to do is have a road mural installed with before and after speed board readers. Those little reader boxes you see on the side of the road that will indicate how fast you're going. Those record the speeds of vehicles and let us know like what the average 85th percentile of speeds are on that road. And so I want before and after evidence, and then 6 month after evidence, so we can actually gauge the impact of road murals and use that evidence to validate the model. When I reached out to ICBC, our provincial car insurance company, to get funding for one of these projects, they were like, well, that's going to make the roads less safe and blah, blah, blah. And there's no evidence to suggest these work. And first of all, I was like, look, we're trying to get evidence, so it'd be nice if you could help us. But second of all, there is evidence. And sometimes road engineering departments, insurers are conservative. So they need that preponderance of evidence to convince them to do something. And so with our project, we're trying to add a research element to it. I find I add research elements to all of my projects as well, just because it helps them engage with different worlds. But that's a really good question. I would say reach out to your municipality and see what the rules are. Some places have really have guidelines you maybe didn't know they existed. And then sometimes they've never even heard of them. If you go to my website, teale.ca, I've got a page on road murals with a lot of information saved up. And on that, I also have just a quick summary. And I'll put a link in the chat here, a summary of all the different municipalities around the region and their response when I reached out to them about like, hey, what if I did a road mural in your municipality? And some of them were like, yes, here's our guidelines. And then some of them were like, no, we don't want that. And then some of them were, some of them were like, we don't know what you're talking about, please go away. So it depends. It depends on who your municipality is. And if you don't like their response, then do something about it. You can reach out to them, you can talk to them, you can run for local office, you can sit on a committee or a board, because your municipality should be yes anding you when it comes to beautiful placemaking projects. Great question though, by the way, thank you. I like bureaucratic swashbuckling, but some folks might find that a bit of an impediment.
Thanks, Teale. I have a question for you, which is a general question. Community is a word that's being used a lot, but yet, as you mentioned, social isolation is a huge problem, increasingly so. So what is a community? And I'm just thinking of sociologist Zygmunt Bauman talks about cloakroom communities, the kind of communities that assemble in a theater, and then this band, so people come together for a brief period of time, and sort of these are fleeting encounters. And I was wondering if little libraries would fall within that category. I know you said that you actually managed to make friends there's a little library outside of my house, and I observe it. It's really cool. Actually, it's being used a lot, but I've never seen people actually bumping into each other or, talking. So yeah,
Oh, that was,
a question around the, and also there are different types of communities, of
yeah.
course, right? And one of the, I think, difficult aspects is precisely how to achieve the sense of endurance, continuity, right?
I think community will mean something different for everyone. I just had a friend of mine visiting, and he's doing his PhD thesis, or he did his master's thesis rather, on Harry Potter trans fan fiction lifestyle and community. So people who dress as Harry Potter characters as their lifestyle. And like, that's a fascinating community. And a lot of those kinds of communities will evolve online, where people from disparate parts of the world can come together over shared interests, whether it's a fandom or whether it's a shared interest in a specific thing. So I think that's fascinating. I think ultimately communities are what we make of them, right? And so when it comes to the libraries particularly, you have kind of two levels of community building. The first is we have a Little Free Library community here in Victoria. So we have an email list of like 600 people, and we did, before the pandemic, we were doing picnics, and that was, the fun of the picnic was, my friend Jean and I organized this, and she built the 250th little library in town. And we had all these activities planned. We had bookmark making for the kids. We had blind date with a book, where you wrap a book up and just put a couple of like random descriptor words on the outside. We had like a story time, and we barely got to any of our activities because all the library people were chatting and sharing stories, and they were all reading books, and they were talking about what they were reading and telling funny stories, or telling the story of the weirdest book they found at their library. And so we actually didn't have to use any of our activities. So that was one level of community. But the other one is the community that forms at the little libraries. So it's interesting how you maybe haven't seen two people like bump into each other at the library and chat, but in a sense, the library becomes a point for community to occur. And so sometimes, you don't actually have to have two people talking to each other. Sometimes the discourse takes place through the intermediary of the library. So a couple of examples would be that help book I mentioned, where people were filling in books to, have help, need help on various issues during the pandemic. I once found a love note taped to the roof of our little library. So someone was using it as part of like a romantic treasure hunt. And so it's one of those things where you don't necessarily need to bump into someone in person. I do, because I'm a very chatty person and I'll fall into conversations with people, but just knowing that you've interacted with the same thing as someone else can also be an element of community. Someone in our neighborhood, and I don't know who they are, is going around and tying little hand painted wooden hearts to the libraries with ribbon. I don't know who they are, but I keep finding them on the libraries, and it fills me with delight to know that someone else is sharing their art with the world through the little libraries. But I think what's interesting is like whether these are like fleeting versus permanent communities. I mean, ultimately, you kind of have these growing concentric circles of community, right? So you've got like your very local community, the street you live on, and then maybe your neighborhood, your municipality, province, nation, et cetera. But there's also overlapping Venn diagram circles, of course, with people's fandoms or hockey, hockey fandoms, or membership in a club or a sport. And so those all kind of overlap, and we situate ourselves within these broader concentric circles of community. And what's interesting, though, is that a lot of those are around a shared thing, which tends to have demographic similarity. So you'll have people who are all like hockey fans tend to be a certain type of person, not always, of course, but a certain kind of community of people. One thing I love about placemaking is it fosters intergenerational community and connectivity. So, books are something, and they're not the only thing, of course, but they are something that transcends different generational divides. And so you can have children's books and self-help books and car mechanic repair books and fiction and nonfiction in a little library. And that brings people from all these different walks of life together, and they're connected by the one thing that is books. And so I think that's really important. And the reason why it's important is because we don't have a lot of opportunities to meet people who are dramatically different than us. So I play on a hockey team. We're the Crows. Go Crows. Ha! And it's a lot of young guys-ish in a sort of between 50 and 18, but a lot of young men, disproportionately white. And so we're not getting kind of diversity of perspectives that we would get if we had some seniors involved, or people of color, or women, or trans, non-binary people. And some people in the team may not ever interact with people from different walks of life. So creating public spaces where people can interact and engage creates those connections, and those connections bring so much wealth to our lives. I had this lovely friend who passed away a couple of years back at 101, and the kinds of conversations I'd have with her over tea were not the conversations I'd have with my hockey buddies. This woman had 100 years of life experience. It was these rich conversations that really made me rethink the way I looked at the world. And that's the kind of interaction that you don't get unless you create space to meet these kinds of amazing people who make your life better. Oh yeah, thank you very much for the comments, Vanessa. I think one of the things I could tell anecdotes with little libraries all day because you get stories from them. Like one very random one was I was at a little library in James Bay, bumped into a gentleman, we started talking, and it turns out that we were both reading the same obscure graphic novel about micronationalism. It came out like 2 months earlier, so like the chances of this was very low. You had to be really interested in micronations. But yeah, we talked for like half an hour on the side of the street. And I think he was like, oh crap, I'm gonna miss my dinner, and the sun setting meanwhile. But yeah, it was incredibly random to meet someone who was reading the same very, very niche book, and just to make a connection with them.
Great. Lots of thank you notes. And indeed, Teale, thanks so much for this very engaging presentation and cute. And thank you all for joining. Just a couple of things before we wrap up. And there's a link. Yes, thank you for that. If you have a moment to share your thoughts about the webinar or suggest a speaker or a topic, please take a second and fill out our post-webinar survey. You will find the link in Zoom's follow-up email. Also, I'd like to announce that our next webinar will take place on June 26th at 3 p.m. as always, and our guest will be Karis Berkowski. She will talk about her book, Why Man Made God. And finally, I'd like to mention that we are supported by membership and donations. So if you would like to become a member, if you're not already, or contribute to our educational programs, including the webinar series, you can do so on our website, www.humanistcanada.ca. Once again, Teale, thank you so much for your presentation. I guess you can reach out to him directly. How can people find you? I think you did share.
Yeah, I think I put the original links in the wrong chat here. So hopefully folks can see the links there. The first one is a link to the Greater Victoria Placemaking Network. We've got blog posts about all things of the library and other placemaking projects. I have to say this, my friends one of my friends does street pianos, other people do light installations. So placemaking is tons of things. So you'll find some information there. Also, I know there's people joining us from around the country. So check out your local neighborhood placemaking networks. There's some really cool stuff being done in Ontario. And the second link there is my own website on road murals rather. So there's some resources there with links and citations if you're interested in some of the empirical evidence on road murals. And if you click one up there, you can also find the various campaigns and projects I work on. I know I've already given one talk here about my work on reproductive justice activism, but you can check out some of my other projects and get in touch if you're interested in any of them. I do everything from saving sea cucumbers to fighting for reproductive justice to installing little free libraries. So it's always something interesting going on.
Right, and this presentation is being recorded and will be available on our website under programs/webinars as soon as it's edited. So please feel free to share it. Once again, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. And thanks again to you.
Thanks, friends.
Talk to you soon.